Some graves hide secrets darker than nightmares. In this video, we reveal 20 burial sites of the most twisted serial killers in history, exposing where these monsters were finally laid to rest and the unsettling legacies they left behind. John Reginald Christie was executed by hanging in 1953 after being convicted for the murder of his wife, Ethel. Yet her death was only part of a far deeper horror. Christie had killed at least 7 other people inside his infamous Notting Hill home at 10 Rillington Place, a house that became one of London's most notorious addresses. After his execution at Pentonville Prison, his body was not released to family members. Instead, he was buried within the prison grounds, in an unmarked grave. Pentonville maintained a secretive execution yard where executed inmates were interred without ceremony. The graves carried no names, only numbers, if anything at all. This anonymity served 2 purposes: to prevent the graves from becoming shrines for morbid admirers, and to protect them from desecration by those who despised the killers. The exact spot of Christie's grave has never been disclosed, and it remains hidden beneath the soil of a still active prison. A nameless patch of earth became the final resting place for a man whose home was once the stage for unspeakable atrocities. Marcel Petiot, a French physician, was unmasked as one of World War II's most sinister killers when authorities discovered the remains of 23 people inside his Paris home. Petiot claimed he was killing Nazi collaborators as part of the resistance, but the truth was far darker. He had been preying upon wealthy Jews desperate to escape occupied France, luring them in with false promises of safe passage in exchange for their fortunes before murdering them. Nicknamed Dr. Satan, Petiot was executed by guillotine in May 1946 at La Santé Prison in Paris. His body was quietly transported to Cimetière Parisien de Thiers, a vast cemetery on the outskirts of the city. But like many executed criminals, he was denied the dignity of a proper burial. No private plot, no gravestone, likely interred in a pauper's section or mass grave. Over the decades, any marker that may have once existed has long vanished, and the ground itself may have been reused. French authorities ensured that Petiot's resting place would be lost to history, so that no trace of Dr. Satan could ever become a destination for the curious. Peter Kürten, remembered as the Vampire of Dusseldorf, terrified Germany in the late 1920s with his spree of murders and assaults. He confessed to crimes far beyond the 9 murders and 7 attempted murders for which he was convicted. His execution came in July 1931, when he was guillotined in Cologne. Kürten's fascination with death was chilling. He even asked before his beheading whether he would still be able to hear his own blood rushing from his severed neck. After his execution, his head was preserved, mummified, and later studied by scientists seeking a physical explanation for his depravity. For decades, his head became a macabre exhibit in Ripley's Believe It or Not museum, a grotesque artifact of infamy. The rest of his body, however, was buried in an unmarked grave in the prison cemetery at Klingelputz. That cemetery no longer exists. The land was redeveloped, erasing any trace of his burial site. Today, Kürten's decapitated body lies somewhere beneath modern Cologne, his head separated and displayed as a morbid curiosity, while his grave has been completely lost to time. Andrei Chikatilo, the Butcher of Rostov, was one of the Soviet Union's most prolific and feared killers. Between 1978 and 1990, he brutally murdered 52 women and children, leaving a trail of terror across Russia. His trial was one of the most infamous of the late Soviet era, and his conviction shocked the nation. In February 1994, he was executed with a single gunshot to the back of the head inside Novocherkassk prison. The fate of his body was shrouded in secrecy. Under Russian law, executed criminals' remains were never returned to families, a strict measure designed to prevent graves from becoming shrines or targets of vigilante rage. Chikatilo was buried in an unmarked anonymous grave, likely on the prison grounds or at a nearby undisclosed location. No record was ever made public, and his family was never told where he was laid to rest. His disposal was carried out with cold bureaucratic efficiency, designed to erase his existence completely. For a man who caused so much anguish, his end was as faceless faceless as possible. No ceremony, no marker, no trace. Charles Manson, the cult leader whose name became a symbol of chaos and brutality, spent nearly 50 years behind bars after orchestrating the infamous 1969 murders. When he finally died of natural causes in November 2017, his passing sparked one of the strangest legal battles in recent memory. Multiple people came forward, each claiming the right to his body. His grandson, a man who insisted he was Manson's son, even a memorabilia collector hoping to profit from the corpse of infamy. For more than 4 months, Manson's remains lay frozen in a Kern County morgue, while the courts decided who truly had a claim. Eventually, the judge ruled in favor of his grandson, Jason Freeman. In March 2018, a small private service was arranged near Porterville, California. After the quiet funeral, Manson's body was cremated and the ashes carried to a remote hillside. There, far from cameras and crowds, they were scattered into the wind over a dry creek bed. The exact location was never revealed. Authorities and family alike wanted to ensure there would be no shrine for his remaining followers and no target for those who despised him. In the end, the man who once craved global attention was reduced to dust, erased into obscurity, leaving behind only his dark legacy. Richard Ramirez, forever branded by the press as the Night Stalker, terrorized California in the mid-1980s with a string of brutal home invasion murders. At least 13 people lost their lives in his spree of violence, crimes that left neighborhoods across Los Angeles paralyzed with fear. He was eventually caught, sentenced to death, and spent more than 2 decades on death row at San Quentin State Prison. But Ramirez never faced the gas chamber. In June 2013, illness claimed him first. Complications from lymphoma cut his life short behind prison walls. His death, however, raised a new problem. Where could a man so notorious, so reviled, possibly be buried? Cemeteries across California refused to accept his remains, fearing protests, vandalism, and endless media attention. Even mortuaries turned his family away, unwilling to attach their names to his legacy. In the end, his relatives quietly took custody of his body. What happened afterward was shrouded in secrecy. It is widely believed that Ramirez was eventually interred somewhere in the San Francisco Bay Area, but no marker, no headstone, no plaque was ever placed. If he does lie buried there, it is in an unmarked grave, just another anonymous patch of earth. Authorities ensured that the man who once haunted the nights of California would never become a landmark, remembered only in whispered stories of terror rather than at a physical grave. Ed Gein's name became forever tied to the darkest corners of American horror. In the 1950s, the quiet farming town of Plainfield, Wisconsin, discovered that their reclusive neighbor was not just a murderer, but also a body snatcher. Inside his farmhouse, police uncovered grotesque trophies, bowls, lamps, and even masks fashioned from human remains. His crimes later inspired some of the most terrifying fictional killers in history, including Norman Bates from Psycho and Buffalo Bill from The Silence of the Lambs. Gein spent the rest of his life locked away in a mental institution, where he died of respiratory failure in 1984. His burial was as unsettling as his life. He was laid to rest in the very same Plainfield cemetery where many of his victims had been stolen from their graves. His plot was placed between the graves of his mother Augusta, whom he idolized obsessively, and his brother Henry. For a time, a simple granite headstone marked Ed Gein's resting place, but the site quickly turned into a morbid tourist attraction. Curious visitors chipped away at the headstone, taking small fragments as grisly souvenirs. In 2000, the marker vanished entirely, stolen outright. A year later, it resurfaced in Seattle, but authorities refused to return it. Instead, it was locked away permanently in storage at the Waushara County Sheriff's Department. Today, Ed Gein's grave is nothing more than a patch of unmarked grass. The exact spot can only be guessed by locating the graves of his family nearby. A man who desecrated others' final resting places was ultimately denied a marked one of his own, an anonymous ending in the same soil he once disturbed. Albert Fish, remembered by chilling nicknames like the Gray Man and the Werewolf of Wisteria, was one of the most disturbing killers in American history. He preyed on children, boasting of countless victims, though only a fraction of his crimes could ever be proven. His letters describing the murder of young Grace Budd shocked even hardened detectives, sealing his reputation as a monster who took pleasure in suffering. In January 1936, justice finally caught up with Fish. He was executed in the electric chair at Sing Sing Prison in New York. True to his twisted nature, he reportedly welcomed his fate, claiming the electrocution would be the supreme thrill of his life. But what became of his body was far less sensational. Like most executed prisoners whose families refused to claim them, Fish was quietly interred in the prison cemetery, a secluded burial ground behind the prison walls, sometimes referred to as the cemetery on the hill. There were no names carved into granite here, only small numbered markers, each one reducing a life to a simple digit. Fish's remains were placed into one of these anonymous plots. No ceremony, no mourner, no legacy. Just another forgotten prisoner among hundreds, his identity stripped away in death just as he had stolen it from his victims in life. The cemetery itself is closed to the public, ensuring that Albert Fish has no shrine, no memorial, only a number lost to time on a lonely hill behind the walls of Sing Sing. Herman Webster Mudgett, better known as H.H. Holmes, is often called America's first serial killer. In the shadow of the 1893 Chicago World's Fair, he constructed his infamous Murder Castle, a hotel filled with hidden rooms, trapdoors, and secret chambers designed for torture and death. Holmes lured victims inside with promises of work or lodging, only for many to vanish without a trace. In 1896, Holmes was executed by hanging at Moyamensing Prison in Philadelphia for the murder of his business partner, though he was suspected of killing far more. Even in death, he was haunted by paranoia. Terrified that his corpse would be stolen and dissected just as he had done to others, Holmes left strict instructions for his burial. His coffin was to be filled with wet cement and buried 10 feet deep. Once the coffin was lowered, workers poured another thick layer of cement over it, entombing his body in an impenetrable block. He was interred at Holy Cross Cemetery in Yeadon, Pennsylvania, sealed away exactly as he demanded. Yet his legend refused to stay buried. For over a century, rumors swirled that Holmes had faked his execution and escaped justice. In 2017, his descendants authorized the exhumation of his grave to put the myth to rest. The cement made the dig excruciatingly difficult, but inside, they found his skeleton preserved within the concrete shell. DNA testing confirmed the remains were indeed Holmes. After the investigation, his body was reinterred in the same grave, once again sealed under concrete. The man who built a house of horrors was buried in his own fortress of stone, leaving behind a legacy of dread and a final resting place as unyielding as the fear he inspired. Peter Sutcliffe, forever branded as the Yorkshire Ripper, terrorized northern England between 1975 and 1980. His brutal attacks claimed the lives of 13 women and left at least 7 others gravely injured. For 5 long years, his reign of violence spread fear across the region, with women terrified to walk the streets at night and police under immense pressure to catch the elusive killer. When Sutcliffe was finally arrested, his name became synonymous with evil. In November 2020, after decades behind bars, Sutcliffe died at HM Prison Franklin from a combination of health complications, including the effects of COVID-19. His death immediately raised the question of what should be done with his remains. Public anger was intense. Families of his victims and communities across Yorkshire were adamant that Sutcliffe must not be allowed a grave, fearing it would become either a grotesque shrine for twisted admirers or a target of constant vandalism. His family, including his estranged ex-wife and brother, took responsibility for the arrangements. Every detail was carried out in total secrecy, away from the eyes of the press and the public. Sutcliffe's body was quietly cremated, though the exact date and location were deliberately withheld to prevent media intrusion. His ashes were then scattered in an undisclosed place. Some believe over the sea, while others suggest a secluded rural spot far from Yorkshire, the land he once terrorized. No grave, no plaque, no memorial. Authorities and his family ensured that Sutcliffe left behind no physical trace in the world. The man who once brought fear to millions was reduced to ash and anonymity, his memory surviving only in the trauma of his crimes, not in any stone or earth that could mark his existence. Dennis Nielsen, one of Britain's most infamous serial killers, preyed on vulnerable young men in London between 1978 and 1983. He lured at least a dozen victims back to his flat, where he strangled them before engaging in grotesque acts of necrophilia necrophilia and dismemberment. For years, Nilsson concealed the bodies in his home, storing remains under floorboards, in cupboards, and even boiling flesh to dispose of it more easily. His reign of horror ended only when plumbers discovered human remains blocking his apartment's drains, exposing the nightmare he had created. After spending 34 years in prison, Nilsson died in May 2018 at HM Prison, Full Sutton, following complications from surgery and a ruptured blood clot. His death reignited anger among the public and families of his victims, who believed he deserved no dignity in death, with no relatives stepping forward to claim him. The responsibility for his remains fell to the state. Following strict protocol, a government-funded funeral was arranged, but it was carried out under a shroud of secrecy. No public ceremony, no mourners, no chance for the media to turn it into a spectacle. Nilsson's body was cremated at an undisclosed location, and his ashes were scattered in private, their destination known only to officials. Just as he had denied his victims peace and dignity, so too was he denied any lasting memorial. There is no grave, no marker, no resting place where his name might linger. The man who hoarded the bodies of others was himself reduced to dust and scattered to the wind, a fittingly empty conclusion to a life defined by cruelty and darkness. Ian Brady, one half of the notorious Moors murderers, committed crimes so horrific that his name still chills Britain to this day. Alongside his partner Myra Hindley, Brady abducted, tortured, and murdered 5 children in the 1960s, burying their bodies on the desolate expanse of Saddleworth Moor. His refusal to reveal the location of his last victim, Keith Bennett, kept families trapped in decades of anguish long after his imprisonment. Brady spent his final years confined to Ashworth Hospital, a high-security psychiatric facility, where he remained until his death in May 2017. Even in death, he sought to wield cruelty. In his final wishes, he demanded that his ashes be scattered on Saddleworth Moor, the very ground where his victims lay buried. To the families and the public, this request was an unforgivable insult, a final act of torment from a man who had already caused immeasurable pain. The courts intervened to ensure his wishes were never honored. A high court judge ruled that Brady's remains must be disposed of with strict secrecy and that even the executor of his will could not know the details. The fear was simple. Any public grave, scattering, or memorial would spark outrage and unrest. In the dead of night, under heavy secrecy, Brady's body was cremated. His ashes were sealed in a biodegradable urn weighted with salt. Without ceremony, the urn was taken aboard a boat from Liverpool Marina and cast into the Irish Sea at a secret location. No grave, no marker, no shrine, just a quiet, anonymous end. The man who once demanded control, who thrived on inflicting pain, was denied even in death the satisfaction of leaving behind a memorial. Ian Brady disappeared into the sea, leaving nothing behind but the horror of his crimes and the sorrow of the children he never allowed to come home. Myra Hindley remains one of the most reviled women in British history. Alongside Ian Brady, she became part of the infamous Moors murders, a series of killings in the 1960s that left families shattered and the nation horrified. Hindley lured children to their deaths with a chilling calmness, her presence ensuring parents felt they could trust her. This betrayal of innocence made her crimes particularly monstrous. After her arrest in 1965, Hindley was sentenced to life imprisonment. Over the decades, she attempted multiple times to convince the public and the courts that she had reformed. Some argued she was manipulated by Brady, but the recordings of her voice during the murders revealed her chilling complicity. The British public never forgave her. To most, she symbolized pure evil, and any attempt at redemption was fiercely rejected. Hindley spent 36 years behind bars, becoming Britain's longest-serving female prisoner. She died in November 2002 at West Suffolk Hospital after suffering from respiratory failure. But even in death, controversy followed her. No local authority wanted her body in their cemeteries, and no community wanted her ashes scattered near their homes. Eventually, under heavy secrecy, her body was cremated at Cambridge Crematorium. The ashes were handed to a former lover and later scattered in Stalybridge near the edge of Saddleworth Moor, the same desolate landscape where her her victims lay buried. Unlike Brady, who was denied even his final wishes, Hindley's ashes were released quietly. But the secrecy was deliberate. Authorities feared public outrage, protests, or even desecration if the exact spot became known. Her death brought no closure. Families of the victims condemned the handling of her remains, believing that even scattering her ashes near the moors was a final insult. For them, the evil she represented could never be erased. Myra Hindley left no grave, no monument, only a legacy of horror that Britain refuses to forget. Fred West's name is forever tied to one of the most shocking crime cases in British history. Alongside his wife Rose, he orchestrated a campaign of torture, abuse, and murder that spanned decades. Together, they preyed upon vulnerable young women, lodgers, runaways, even their own children. The West's home at 25 Cromwell Street in Gloucester became infamous as the House of Horrors, where bodies of their victims were discovered buried beneath the floors and in the garden. In 1994, after police unearthed human remains at the property, Fred was arrested and charged with multiple murders. During interrogations, he appeared chillingly calm, at times even smirking when discussing his crimes. His wife Rose denied responsibility, but the evidence revealed both played central roles in the killings. While awaiting trial in January 1995, Fred West took his own life inside his prison cell at HM Prison, Birmingham. He used a length of rope made from his bedsheets, leaving behind only a hastily written note professing his love for Rose. His suicide meant he would never face full justice in court, a decision that robbed many families of the chance to see him convicted. His burial, like much of his life, was shrouded in controversy. None of the local cemeteries wanted to accept his remains, fearing outrage from the public. Eventually, West was laid to rest in an unmarked grave at Ford Cemetery in Gloucester, with only prison and council officials present. There was no ceremony, no mourners, just a swift, secretive burial. The plot itself was deliberately kept anonymous, ensuring no marker could ever exist for a man so despised. Cromwell Street was later demolished by authorities, with the land turned into an open space to erase any physical reminder of the atrocities committed there. But despite the destruction of the house and the secrecy of his grave, Fred West's crimes continued to haunt Britain. His name remains synonymous with cruelty, manipulation, and horror, his unmarked grave serving as a silent testament to society's desire to forget him.